Hello everybody, Justin Bell here on Drive to Win. Once again, I'm inside the beautiful SiriusXM studios here at the Wynn Las Vegas. And of course, if you are one of the early birds, you might be catching us on ESPN Extra Channel 81 or on demand on the SXM app. Either way, the show is brought to you by Mobile One for the love of driving. We have so much to talk about today, and I'm going to be bringing on a new guest for us, a new friend for the show, Chris Medland, a journalist who now is part of the Formula One family and is a new face on the F1TV app, which is my favorite way to watch the race. But boy, oh boy, there was so much going on in this race. Unfortunately, my producer Jeremiah was away being a traitor watching a NASCAR race with his college buddies, so he hasn't even watched the race fully yet. So he is just, he's looking at me right now. He's missed one of the best races of the year, but I tell you what, as I've told anybody, look at him, he's embarrassed by this. But as I've told anybody that wants to listen, it was the culmination for me it's of all these incredible story arcs forging their way into this amazing entertainment sphere that is Formula One these days. And there's so much going on. Now, of course, 275,000 people thought the same thing, went through the gates there at the football stadium in Miami to watch in person this weekend's race. They braved rain. A little bit of sunshine, of course, no rain for the main event, even though it was threatened. But Miami brings the celebrities, and that's why I couldn't get a ticket to go, because that paddock and that grid was just jam full of all the color that Miami can bring. And I think that's definitely part of what makes Formula One so special here in America more than anywhere else. And remember, this kicks off our trio of North American races over the rest of the season. So a pretty good start to everything. Well, talking about showing your color, Kimi Antonelli, he certainly showed his. And in the sprint race, getting that sensational pole, but I'll come back to that in a minute, which then unraveled when his inexperience also showed its true colors. But when we got to the main race, once again, some great results all the way through. So I did want to kick it off with a little bit of a recap of the sprint. Now, it's so interesting to me what that does to the technical and engineering pressures of Formula One for everyone involved, because it really does result in so little track time before they have to go for it in qualifying. And sprint pole was Kimi Antonelli, and so much buzz about it. The youngest ever pole sitter in any race format in a Formula One race. And just to see what he put together there in the constraints of a racetrack bound by these concrete walls, you get it wrong in any way, as we saw people do, and you brush the wall and it can just totally mess with your race. And to keep it clean is all about being a driver that knows from the minute they turn the steering wheel, come off the brakes, they know exactly where the car's going to be on the exit. And actually, I have to say, I was relatively good in sports cars on a street race, because if you're a very flamboyant driver with the tail happy end of the car, it really can end up with you clipping the wall at the back. So it was a brilliant lap by him. But can you imagine the media pressure, the media scrum all around him? And there was a shot they took when Laura was in the pit lane afterwards, and literally this swarm of media following Kimi down into his Mercedes garage, and just incredible. Now, the race didn't go his way. As I said, right from the start, he locked up and just went on at the first corner, and he was really the victim to the pressure. And in the wet, though, I've got to tell you this, when you're leading the field in a wet race, yes, you don't have the spray in your eyes, but also you're the first one to visit uncharted territory on the asphalt, and you just don't know where that level of grip is going to be, that threshold, until you arrive there. And boy, he arrived up, locked up, went a little bit wide, and then it all went a little sideways for him. But the key thing for me is that he outpaced George Russell again, and that level of performance when he really didn't have that many laps under his belt, and it was all premeditated for him in the preparation through sim work. So he does all that sim work, and it just shows how accurate that must be, because he could get there and put the car on pole against, okay, not just everyone else, but especially against his teammate George. Something interesting to think about, though, is, of course, if you think he was one of the prodigies on his way up through the ranks. That's why Toto Wolff, Mercedes, caught hold of him so early, and he's in Formula One at 17, now 18 years old. But everybody in Formula One was the top of their class in their own way growing up. It's a bit like going to watch the LA Philharmonic or some big orchestra. Even the fifth guy at the back on the violins is guy or girl was the best of their class. They were the best music student at school. They were the best at college, and they're participating at the top level. Same as with a basketball or football team. So when you get there, you might be this dynamo on the way up, but when you actually arrive, you're in a class with other athletes who were all extraordinary, but they also have the benefit of experience. Now, as we've seen with Oscar Piastri, 2 years ago, we were like, oh, when that boy gets it together, he'll win a lot of races. It's happening right now, isn't it? So I think when Kimi, as we said a couple of weeks ago, when he gets unleashed, we see his full potential. Was the leash slackened off a bit? Was it loosened this week by Toto and his engineer to allow him to show a bit more speed? Methinks so. But of course, what happened in the race is something else. It's also an interesting thing to compare him to Lewis Hamilton because obviously, but technically, from different ends of the spectrum, they're both in new cars with new teams for the first time, right? So you would think that a lot of the same pressures are at play. They're both having to learn this proprietary technology, understanding how everything works. But arguably, Kimi's doing a better job than Lewis, right? He is definitely right up at the top of the field, and he isn't giving any snarky, rude radio calls to his team. He's just keeping his head down. He's keeping a level head, and he's dealing with that intense pressure like a pro. And I know that they are shielding him from all the noise. That's the way they refer to it. But I think Lewis's team are doing the same, other than the power and the pressure of the Italian media. And when you're Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time world champion, there is a different level of expectation. But I would say that on paper, he is doing a better job right now than Lewis. And of course, the other thing is, if you think about the rankings of Formula One, there's definitely 3 tiers, and now there's 2 for me. Oscar, Lando, and Max are in that top tier. And the second tier was really Leclerc and Russell, and Kimi would have been the third. But now he's right up there, 5th and 6th in nearly every race. And he is definitely one of the front-running drivers. But I'll say it again, when he gets it all together, it's going to be Piastri-like. I can't wait. And of course, then we had to line up for the main race. And we'll talk about the race itself with Chris. But Max had yet again another stunning pole lap. And we can't just say that it was Max's outrageous ability that pulled it together and the car's crappy. It obviously isn't. They have caught that little delta. Well, it's a big delta between them and the McLarens, even though the McLarens have such extraordinary pace. Over 1 lap with Max behind the wheel on a track like that, he really pulled it out. And, credit to him. Norris alongside him on the front row. Kimi outperformed George again. Took a lot of mental strength to get over the disappointment and that sort of, I imagine it was almost unspoken pressure. Everyone going, if you win this race, the sprint race, can you imagine? And of course, within seconds, he knew that wasn't going to happen on the sprint race. But he rebounded, regrouped, and got third on the grid for the main race. And then, of course, Oscar rounding that out. But we'll get into that with Chris a little bit later. So now I want to very proudly announce a new partnership for us here on Drive to Win. As you know, LVMH recently signed a 10-year global partnership with Formula One, involving several of the iconic LVMH Maison, as they call it, Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy, and Tag Heuer. And just look at the trophy on the podium, which they show every race. It's this travel Louis Vuitton case with the trophy inside, and the tagline is "Victory Travels in Louis Vuitton." It's just stunning. I'm sure all the drivers love it. And the Tag Media social team did such a great job this weekend, and the branding everywhere was absolutely spot on. Now, Moet Hennessy is back as the official champagne on the podium. And it's a funny little time because the tradition goes back to an accidental discharge of a bottle of champagne on the podium while he was celebrating by the famous Joe Siffert. But then Dan Gurney liked what he saw, and a year later, he actually picked up the trophy, popped the cork, and it was the first time that anyone was sort of sprayed like that on purpose, a tradition that continues to today. And that ties in Tag Heuer nicely because Joe Siffert was the first driver to get his fellow Swissman, Jack Heuer, involved in the sport. And he then became the first ever ambassador back in the 60s. And then my dad, Derek Bell, was introduced to Tag Heuer by Steve McQueen on the set of the movie Le Mans. So every time I look at this watch, I think of Dad and Steve. And I couldn't be prouder to be a partner of the brand and wear their watches. So Tag Heuer are now a partner to us here on Drive to Win. And it really gives us a greater access and an insight into Formula One through the lens of this iconic brand. So check out their line of Formula One inspired timepieces at tagheuer.com. Well, in more sad news, the passing of Jochen was reported this weekend after complications from a stroke a few months ago. Now, I grew up watching Jochen as part of the infamous Rothmans Porsche 956, 962 squad, and it was my dad, Jackie X, Hans Stuck, and Jochen really was a man's man. He was a strong man, and he was strong as an ox and fearless and brave behind the wheel. And when you'd give him a hug, it was like hugging a wine barrel. He was just that stocky. In Formula One, he competed for a number of teams between 1973 and 1982, including Surtees and March Grand Prix. But his sole race win came with McLaren at the 1975 Spanish Grand Prix. But he also got another 7 podiums with McLaren during his time there. He went on in sports cars to win a total of 32 World Championship victories and won Le Mans in a Sauber in 1989. He was my dad's teammate, but he really became a friend, a dear friend of mine. I saw him at Pebble Beach Concours and all these other events around the world, and he always had time for our family, and I just really enjoyed having him as a friend as I got older. So the memories will remain, and he will be sorely missed. R.I.P. Jochen Mass. Well, hey guys, it's that time of year again to get your plans in order to attend the 2025 Concours right here at the Wynn Las Vegas. This year's event is a weekend-long celebration that promises to be the social event of the fall season, where the world's most prestigious cars and top automakers will grace the beautiful greens of the Wynn Golf Club for the 2025 Concours at Wynn Las Vegas. It's the 4th annual gathering, and we're featuring an expanded showcase of more than 250 unique cars within 4 judged and non-judged categories for vehicle entry and display. Now, this year's event will take place from October 31st through November 2nd. You want more information about tickets and room packages? Just visit lasvegasconcours.com. Well, let's bring on Chris Medland now in more cheerful news. Chris is a freelance broadcaster and journalist who really specializes in Formula One for various print, online, and broadcast clients. He's also the Formula One correspondent for Racer Magazine and Racer.com. But we've just seen him join the F1TV lineup down there in the pit lane, bringing his amazing insight, actually, and perspective on the sport. And I can't wait to talk to him about what he feels about that. But of course, he also is a regular show on SiriusXM as well. His show is on just before ours. Well, hello, Chris. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks very much, Justin. I'm very well, thanks. Just recovering from a hectic weekend.
I cannot even imagine the pace of the Miami Grand Prix for you, not just the work side, but just before we came on the show, didn't you say it was a birthday as well, a friend had?
Yes, yeah. One of the journalists who works for The Athletic, a guy called Luke Smith, turned 30 this weekend. So he was sensible on Saturday night, which was his actual birthday. But I've dragged everyone to Chicago for a baseball game to celebrate.
Very British of you, I think. No.
I know, right?
Exactly. So before we kick off talking about what was a pretty epic weekend, first of all, welcome to the TV side of things and talk about how the F1 TV opportunity happened, because I know you go to all the races and obviously have those great relationships, but it is different doing TV, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. I actually used to do TV back before COVID, which I think is the kind of defining line for a lot of people about when things happen. So I was part of the first season of Drive to Survive on Netflix. And then off the back of that, I got a job as like the reporter and pundit for a Middle East broadcaster called NBC. And because I was seen doing that, F1 TV, or F1's own channels at the time, they hadn't launched the OTT service yet, would ask me to do some interviewing and some little bits, but never appearing as a pundit sort of thing. And then they took a lot of that more in-house rather than using ad hoc people. So that kind of fell by the wayside with COVID hitting. And off the back of COVID was when I got involved with SiriusXM and doing a lot of radio stuff as well. But yeah, it was over this winter, I think, with some changes at F1 TV, and obviously Will Buxton, who's been a brilliant part of that, but going and doing IndyCar opened up a few opportunities where they needed to move some things around. And we had a few chats, and they said, look, when we need some help, can you get involved? And it looks like they've needed quite a bit of help a few times, because I've been on, I think, the last 4 race weekends, but it's been great fun. I'm loving it.
A bit of it behind the scenes, is it? I mean, I remember from doing Le Mans sports cars, a lot of meetings, a lot of prep, a lot of walking around, talking to people. Any particular quirks about behind the scenes in Formula One TV? Do you have to meet a lot? Are you there awful early in the morning? How's the pace of things?
To be honest, no. Because I already did a lot of writing, and the way the media sessions obviously work with F1, if you cover it from a print point of view or an online point of view, you are doing a lot of your work after the fact. So it's reactionary stuff. Thursday spent doing lots of, that's our media day at races before any track running happens. So lots of interviews. But then you need the track running to happen to do reaction and speak to drivers and team members afterwards. So none of that's changed. All that's changed is maybe slightly earlier in, but only marginally. But essentially, I feel kind of lucky. All that knowledge base was there, and I'm asked to just utilize that knowledge to explain things, to give my opinion, and to help with some of the interviews. So instead of sitting in the media center and watching a session, so my tweeting has gone down. Because I used to live tweet most sessions from following it from the media session, from the media center. I end up just stood in front of the camera and talking about things that I would be talking about to other people in the media center. So essentially, it's just taking what was existing knowledge and skill set and just applying it in front of a camera holding a microphone. But there's the odd technical check. Generally, though, they're a brilliant team. They're very easy to work with. So I just show up a few minutes before we need to go on air, and they tell me what we're going to talk about, and we get on with it.
But I love it. Well, you're doing a great job. I really, it's great seeing you out there and getting your insight. Well, let's talk Miami then. I imagine that from the minute everyone got there, hitting the ground running, it was a Miami scene. Right? I mean, it just parties and celebrities. Before we talk about the race, talk about the vibe.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of commits to that Miami vibe. And it kind of needs to, doesn't it? We've got 3 Grand Prix now in the US, and they each need to really be full on in terms of what is their USP. And Miami does do that with kind of the Miami beach scene and the party scene. But to be honest, it comes on a little bit later. There was a bit going on the Thursday evening, a couple of events, but they were actually slightly too early to get to. So that was a kind of a normal day, Thursday. But Wednesday afternoon, Racing Bulls V-Carb did launch their new livery, and they did that in a very cool Miami way on a beach with the sunset in the middle of the bay. So that was very, very smart way of doing it, but also very Miami. And yeah, you do feel like some of these events you go to that are on the periphery, even if they are work events, are very much tailored to the area you're in. So that was cool. And then, to be honest, Friday again was a very hectic day with it being a sprint weekend. It was Saturday and Saturday night that really stood out. So the new Cadillac F1 team did.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, they're down in South Beach, and it was huge. It was lavish, but there was never a promise of anything tangible. Really, they never said we're going to announce anything big. They just kind of wanted to make themselves seen and heard, and draw a line in the sand that said we're coming into F1, and this is kind of how we're going to look a bit. This is going to be our vibe. And that's exactly what they did. They released like a 2-minute video after a few statements made on a stage. But the rest of it was essentially just very nice food that you could go up and grab if you wanted, and an open bar. So sadly, yours truly was driving and staying a long way from South Beach. So I got to deal with the Miami traffic a lot. But I had some early starts as well, so I couldn't make use of that. But it was... that was exactly as I think a lot of fans would imagine Formula One to be, the glitz and the glamour away from the track. It's actually rare that it's like that, but in Miami, it definitely is like that.
Yeah, they turn up the heat, literally, Miami heat. Do celebrities are now a thing de rigueur on the Formula One paddock, but I know they turn up in Vegas in a big way, and they turn up in Austin in a big way, but Miami, they certainly, half of them live there. Any fun celebrity interactions or perspectives you saw going on?
So perspectives, yes. I mean, on F1 TV, actually, on our grid walk, we had Jack Whitehall, the comedian, who he is a British comedian, but fans might know him from the F1 75 live launch event that they did at the start of the year, where he was hosting, and he was really getting stuck into pretty much everyone in Formula One. He did not hold back, did he? So he was quite funny because he was on his best behaviour. And he was almost nervous because suddenly he's facing them where they could give him a response. That was quite funny to see. There were some real big names there. A lot of NFL players have shown up, a few basketball stars that weren't involved anymore in the NBA. But to be honest, the thing that Miami's become, certainly the grid, which is where you see most of the aviators, is there's so many that you can't move for bumping into one or another or seeing one. But you also can't really spot one. You'll come off the grid. It was only last year Donald Trump showed up at the race, and I never even laid eyes on him. But lots of other people did, but plenty of others, like me, if you're just in the wrong part of the grid, it's so busy, you don't see what's happening elsewhere. Whereas there's a number of other races on the calendar where you can comfortably work out, okay, where's there a slightly bigger crowd? That's where there must be somebody important. So, Miami's done a really good job of not only attracting lots of people, but as you've mentioned, doing it year on year. It wasn't just year one when it was exciting. It's every year now that people still come along and want to be seen there. So that's been a real strength, I think, of the race.
Yeah. So I always like to think about racing and that big build up on the grid as a driver down to those last few minutes. You put your helmet on, you get in the car, and the business of being a racing driver is about to start. It's the same for all the teams, all the bullshit stops, people get moved off the grid. Describe what it was like with Max and Lando there, and then with Kimi right there and Oscar. What's it like, that intensity for everyone listening in those last few minutes before such an important Grand Prix starts? If you're there, so you're feeling it.
Yes, yeah, I'm very lucky to be able to stand in between them. I think our last link that we did live from the grid before we were cleared off as media, and as media we get to stay on longer as well, I must add. So kind of guests and VIPs are allowed on for a long time, but there's an earlier point that they start being cleared off, only by a few minutes, but because you have so many people to get off the grid, they go first. And television crews and broadcasters can stay on a bit longer. And as it starts to thin out, you can then look from one car to another. And we were stood between Max and Lando's cars. And you did feel it because we'd seen it from the sprint race the day before with Oscar Piastri getting down the inside of Kimi Antonelli, getting a better start because second place on the grid was on the inside line. So even though it wasn't the optimum grip in terms of what the launch you would get, you had a better chance of making a move to the inside of turn one. And there was a point when Max was about to get in his car. We actually had interviewed Christian Horner on the grid, and over his shoulder, you could see Max. And he was standing there and he was trying to stay calm, trying to stay in his zone, but with so much noise around him, not just people, but music blaring, engines firing up. It's pretty overwhelming at times, I think. There's a lot of people that don't like going on. They kind of get anxiety with it. There's just so much stimulation. So for an F1 driver, it needs to be, as you say, so focused. Because what they're looking for as well when they get off the line is that perfect bite point from the clutch to get the perfect launch. They're dealing with such fine margins and they want to have that perfect feel. They need to be totally in tune with all of their senses. And when they've got this overload, it's so hard for them to stay in that zone. And we saw it with Max, where he was looking around kind of over buildings, over the pit building, kind of up into the sky, where he was, I think, just looking for something that wasn't so hectic or stimulating. And that was what gave me a feeling that he knew he had a fight on his hands in that race. Lando, I didn't actually get to lay eyes on until he was in the car, so he had his helmet on. But that's the time the drivers themselves say they like the most, because they finally get to close off everything else. It's just them and their car. There's nothing else to distract them, and that's when they get to focus. But it really did feel like a crucial start, that the race was going to hinge on it. And I don't mind admitting, I totally got my prediction wrong. But I had Max retaining the lead at the start from Lando, and winning the race, holding Lando up, but also rain getting involved and it just being a bit chaotic later on. So I thought, as long as Max keeps the lead at the start, then he's going to win this race. And as everyone could see if they watched it, Max did hold the lead into turn one, but nearly got it wrong, and they got wheel to wheel at the next corner, and Lando ended up being pushed off, and it got a bit controversial. And it just showed how they're going to go racing for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. But the first 5 seconds quite often are the most defining point. So, that's when you really do feel that tension build, because you know how crucial it's about to be.
It was like a shotgun going off, wasn't it? It wasn't a sniper rifle at start. It was just stuff happening all the way down the grid. And I think the broadcaster, the host broadcaster, trying to work out what to follow, didn't even know what to do. Describe that moment for Lando there. I mean, it's such a tight left-right into that very short run to that first series of corners. You'd seen it happen the day before. It's easy to get it wrong. And Lando went on, off the track on the right there. Lucky there is a bit of runoff there, I guess. But the consequences for him pushed him all the way down to 5th, 6th place. And I was like, God, he's just unraveled everything he's been doing. It's just totally screwed it up. From your point of view, how did that, you said your predictions, what did you think was going to happen then?
To be honest, I didn't think Lando was going to get a great shot at Max. In a sense, what happened initially off the line, Max got a better launch, he came straight across in front of Lando to stop him overtaking down the inside. And once he'd done that, that was exactly as I expected it. I thought, right, he's been aggressive, he's made sure he's not getting overtaken on the inside, and Lando will just have to sit and wait to see if he's got better race pace. But then Max uncharacteristically locked up into turn one and went a bit wide, and that opened the door for Norris to come back at him. I think, to be honest, we saw quite a few incidents in those first few corners because we'd had so much rain. We had torrential rain before the race. Fortunately, early enough that we weren't on air for it, so we could get out in sort of dry and sunshine as the track was drying. But it meant that all the rubber that had been on the track had been washed away, so it was very low grip. Cars were at their heaviest with the full amount of fuel in there. Tyres are at their coldest. And I think it was pretty hard for everyone to handle. And Max pushed to the very limit at turn two, had a bit of a moment, actually, that he caught.
Yeah.
And when he did that pushed Lando wide. I actually felt like that was one of those where it wasn't fully intentional, but Max won't mind that it happened, if that makes sense. And Lando wasn't exactly in a bad place either, but did have to respond to it. It's just the fact that then, as you say, there was runoff, that's good, but there's big curbs, so he couldn't just jump straight back onto the track, and he had to go through some wet runoff area.
You see that puddle, didn't you, on the right?
Up.
You know, and when you're on slicks, mate, that is
tires as well.
Cold slicks, not good. So I was thinking to myself as they got through that, and obviously a lot of attention on Kimi. Antonelli, after what he went through in the sprint race, still a great showing, in so many ways. And I'm thinking, you got Piastri right up his chuff, from that moment there, and the McLarens just look strong immediately, especially with Lando also starting his recovery drive literally the same lap. It was pretty evident to everyone very quickly their pace.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Oscar played the first corner again brilliantly. Say he's done that 3 times in a row now. He did in the sprint, and he did watching that unfold in front of him, and he went from 4th to 2nd and suddenly was in prime position to win. But as you say, he was instantly on the back of Max, and Lando started making moves as well. And I think because we've expected that McLaren might have an advantage in terms of getting their tyres working, but looking after them. That's something that they've kind of shown as a strength of theirs during the year so far. But where other teams are helped is normally over a race weekend, you have lots of running, and the track gets more and more grippy with more and more rubber laid down on it. So with more grip, it kind of helps you look after your tyres slightly. So McLaren's advantage in that sense would get lessened as the weekend went on. And they'd still have it by the race, but it would look much bigger on a Friday, for example. Here, because all that grip got washed away, the advantage was at its biggest at the start of the race. And very quickly, I think, became evident to everyone that was competing with McLaren, except maybe Max. But what Max was hoping for was rain to hit. It looked like it might, and he was just trying to hold on. He's thinking, if I can keep these cars behind me, then when it rains, I've got a chance because all bets are off. If it stays dry, I haven't got a hope. And I think we saw him really defending so robustly because he thought I could maybe still stay in the fight for the win here. Made for great battles. It was awesome. I think it's some of the best racing we've had in Miami. But it was a shame the rain didn't hit in that sense and mix things up, because once the McLarens hit the front, they just disappeared. Yeah,
we needed that Jeopardy play, didn't we? It's like if either we have tire deg or rain. You need one or the other to introduce that variable. When Doohan and Lawson made contact, got a puncture, I think Doohan was rather unlucky, and then we had the VSC. I guess this morning the social media is talking about, he will probably be replaced for the next race. Do you think that's the case?
I do, sadly.
That's sad, isn't it?
Yeah, Jack Doohan looks like it'll be Franco Colapinto in the car, I think, from Imola onwards. It certainly felt like it was on the cards from the end of last year when Doohan was put in Abu Dhabi at one race early. It almost felt like a bit of an evaluation of him, because at that point, Colapinto was available but wasn't an Alpine driver, and he still had a race to finish at Williams. And Colapinto's stock went massively up because he performed so well out of nowhere, really, unexpectedly, replacing Logan Sargent last year, but also then brought this huge interest from South America and Argentina, including a lot of backing. So he's the perfect combination of someone who was quick, young, with potential, and brought huge backing to any team that would run him. So a number of teams were going to be interested, and I felt like Alpine were always trending towards wanting to put him in the car. He's technically on loan with Alpine from Williams, and Williams have actively said, like publicly, James Vowles, the team principal, said Franco's there because we expect him at some point to race. So in that sense, the writing was always on the wall for Jack. I hoped that it wouldn't come this soon, partly because I still don't feel he's had a fair crack at it. I feel like he's shown some good potential. Good flashes of performance. Yeah, he's looked really strong at times, certainly not put it all together all the time. But this weekend in particular, sprint qualifying, certainly not his fault. The team messed up and it cost him and he dropped out in SQ1 and he was very angry about that. And that was, again, the first hint that he thought, I'm running out of time and chances here and the team aren't helping me. And then in the race, I actually don't think he really did a lot wrong in the collision with Lawson. No. I think he just got squeezed on the inside and couldn't go anywhere. Sadly, it took him out the race on the first lap, and then he doesn't get a chance to show what he can do again, having out-qualified his teammate Pierre Gasly, who's very highly rated. So I do feel like he was a bit hard done by in that sense and deserved the chance to really have a clean weekend and show what he could do, because it wasn't his fault this weekend. Sadly, that looked like it was his kind of last attempt to impress, and I imagine that decision was made long ago, and it's kind of been planned out for a while. So what I hope is that Doohan still remains part of the Alpine setup, and maybe in the future, or if there's any need for a reserve to step in, he gets another chance.
I hope so. I think when you get on the Flavio Briatore shit list or the out list, you're going. I mean, obviously, you and I have known him from decades before, and his reputation. Now he's an older guy, but he hasn't lost his teeth, has he? And if watching last season of Drive to Survive, it gives the new audience a real insight into what a guy like him, how he operates. So I'm sure that's a lot of pressure when he calls you in for a chat. Oh.
Yeah, I do not envy any of the drivers that have to work under Flavio, even Pierre Gasly. And it was legit that Pierre had a really good race thing in Qatar. They showed up in Abu Dhabi for the final round. Flavio said to him, and it was captured, I think, on Drive to Survive, that was proper driving. Like, I didn't think you had it. I didn't think you were that good. Yeah. And Pierre's like, oh, thanks, kind of laughing it off. He's like, no, seriously. And that is the way he acts. And at the very least, he's very blunt. He's very clear, even if he's being harsh. But yeah, I think if Flavio was brought in to turn that team around, and one of the things that would certainly help is if they had bigger backing, like more money coming in, that meant Renault, who have been unsure whether they want to keep backing that team, don't have to put so much money in themselves. So there's other reasons that Colapinto would be attractive. But at the same time, as I said, he's quick. So I do think that Flavio won't hesitate if he wants to make that change.
Yeah. I was thinking during that first VSC that probably when we watch next season of Drive to Survive, we'll be listening in to Toto and Kimi during that, because I think Kimi needed that break to reset, after the start. And we all do as drivers, unless you're the one in the lead, right? You're actually, especially after a frantic start. But I bet we'll get some insight into radio transmissions up and down the grid when we see it. That's what I love about the show, right? You get the chance to hear communications that we don't normally. But we've been speculating that they've really held Kimi, Toto and Bono have held Kimi on the right kind of leash, letting him a little bit more every race. Do you think that's what we saw this weekend? A loosening of the leash?
Maybe slightly. I think what they've done is they've really found a good way of giving Kimi the guidance he needs, the space he needs, the lack of pressure that he needs as such a young driver in a team that is capable of fighting for podiums. And don't forget that he's not finished on the podium yet, and George Russell has multiple times, but no one says in any way, shape or form that he's performing badly. They're talking about how brilliantly he's performing, and he is, but it's good that they've set the right expectations for him. But also I think they've helped him learn very quickly in terms of pointing out where he's gone wrong and when, or allowed him to do that and helped him find his right way. And he gave a great example of it actually ahead of the race in Miami, where he said in Japan, Suzuka being a very punishing circuit, exciting, high speed, but if you get it wrong, you can have some big accidents, and you have to respect that track essentially. And Kimi said, I respected it too much. I started so far back in FP1, kind of left too much of a margin to make sure that I didn't make any silly mistakes and go over the limit. But by the time qualifying came round, I was still too far from the limit. And it's not that I didn't know that I could get there, but I hadn't stepped up to it quickly enough. So then I had to make a much bigger jump between the final practice session and qualifying to get performance. And that was a little bit of a reach, and it didn't all come together. So he'd taken that learning and applied it heading into future races. But he said, specifically going to the Miami weekend as a sprint race, he was saying, I'm actually going to be pushing harder in FP1 than I have been in the past, because I need to be closer to the limit starting this weekend to be able to then find that limit or reach it in the competitive sessions that follow. And I thought that was so mature and telling for an 18-year-old. to kind of admit almost, I was a bit too cautious here and I need to be a bit braver almost. But he speaks about it so matter of fact. And I think it's because, the team go through this with him. He voices some of these concerns maybe, or some of the issues he's having. They give him the data or the experience that helps him then piece it together and make sense of it. And once he understands it, he's like, okay, I know what I need to do next. And then he just goes out and does it. That's what's so impressive about it.
Yeah, really, really. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying to see the journey is going to lead over the next couple of years. So obviously by about lap 10, we had Oscar and Max in that great scrap, right? I mean, it was really good. But something I realized while I was watching it is we've always seen Max in the aggressor role, the hunter, or leading out the front. I mean, he's always going forward. So those are skills that he has. But we've never actually, it's obviously happened before, but not a common occurrence that you have to watch him using his defensive skills. And it was impressive. He's not an easy man to go by because he's going to put you in the wall if you make a half-hearted effort. But it was really enjoyable to watch Oscar's aggressiveness and his defensiveness, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I felt that Max was actually spot on the way he defended that whole race. I've been critical of him in the past when he's not been. I think back to Mexico, you're right. There's specific moments, and not many of them, that we can talk about with Max and defending. Mexico last year against Lando, where he really drove Lando off the track and earned penalties, but it still prevented Norris from winning that race, and that might be one of the reasons he wanted to do it when he realised his car wasn't competitive enough. And also Austria, I think, the way that Norris actually, I think, fought Max just like Max fights other people. Yeah. And then both of them were complaining about the other one. And it's like, you're actually being very similar. That's why you're clashing here. But generally, on those occasions, I felt like Max maybe slightly overdid it on occasion. Certainly not in Miami. I think that he was firm but very fair on every time. And he was very clear with what he was going to do. He made his moves and he stuck to them. He made everything harder for the other driver, but never impossible or never, like you say, Lando lost out at one point trying to go around the outside, and it just wasn't going to happen because Max was always going to run him out of road. But every other time, even with Oscar, Max would make the clear move to the inside and say, go on then, are you good enough to go around the outside? And Oscar would know, A, no, I don't have the performance to do that right now. But B, if I even try, I know what you're going to do. So what I really liked in that dynamic was seeing how the two of them played each other. And I think that's why Oscar ended up getting through more quickly than Lando did. Yeah. Because Lando still has that uncertainty of, well, he'll put me in the wall, but will he? I need to get past him quickly. This might be the way to do it. Lando's still, I feel like, still learning. And I feel like he maybe should have learned by now a slightly better way of dealing with Max. But it must be hard behind the wheel and in the heat at the moment. Whereas Oscar's probably been able to watch how Lando's gone about it and not succeeded and had a slightly different approach. And that's now switched it round, as you say, to Max now needing to learn, okay, how am I going to fight Oscar in the future? How am I going to deal with him? Because he drives and races me slightly differently to the way Lando does.
I think he's looking in the mirror a bit more there, as in the literal mirror. He can see a lot of his same qualities in Piastri, and he knows, as you say, he isn't going to give him any more quarter than he gives himself. I think we saw also their appreciation from inside the cockpit when enough's enough, because when Lando was harrying him, then he had a clean pass because Max just knew he didn't have the performance level. I think that was like lap 18 or whatever. He just seemed resigned, because there comes a point as a driver you just can't hold up anymore. But meanwhile, Piastri had sodded off 9 seconds ahead. It was perfect for his race.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that Max was looking to do, as I mentioned a bit earlier, was about hoping rain would come. And I think he was taking more out of his tyres as well. He was risking everything because he thought, I don't need to think about how long is this stint going to be, really. I don't need to think about my maximum tyre life, because before I get there, rain may well hit or should hit based on what the forecast was saying. And then we're going to be changing for intermediates anyway, and it's going to be about the timing of that. And until that point, I need to keep these McLarens in range. And once Oscar was gone, then he's thinking, okay, that for now at least, that's a race that I cannot win. I can't go and catch him again. But what I can do is keep Lando in play. And if anything, maybe he fought Lando, I don't want to say slightly harder, but he would have been almost extra motivated, having lost one position, that he's not going to lose it.
He looked pissed off, didn't he? And his driving looked pissed off, actually.
Yeah, there's a body language to a car, isn't there? Very well. And you could see it. You could see it late in the race as well. But I think it was also a sign of how the Red Bull was allowing him to do that slightly.
Yeah.
And this sounds silly because he was lacking true performance, but they did bring a slight upgrade, Red Bull, to the weekend. And I know that Max said that the balance was slightly better. He felt a bit more confident in the car. So I think when he got pissed off and he got annoyed and he got fired up, he was able to wrestle the car in the way he wanted to. Didn't mean he was going any quicker, but he had that kind of ability to display that kind of car behavior that he hasn't always been able to. Quite often he's actually just been a bit of a passenger, just complaining and going slowly because the car doesn't let him drive it in the way he wants to drive it. So I think we really saw that manifest itself, because it also was, okay, I can drive this car slightly more the way I want to, with a slight bit more of control that I want, and it's still much slower than the McLaren right now, and that will really have been stinging.
Yeah. Obviously, the quality of everybody in the grid, there's so many scraps going on the whole way down. I did enjoy Albon, right? Albon, when he went past his teammate against orders, pulled out, proved a point by 3 seconds, then got in a direct scrap with Kimi. Also, later he overtook him after all the pit stops. Alexander, I mean, he's, for such a likable guy, he seems to be anyway, I've never met him, but he's a real threat behind the wheel, isn't he? And I just think he overtakes well, and it just shows, talk about the performance of the Williams. We'd never have been saying they would run 6th and 7th, qualify in that, or, just to even put them in the same breath as Ferrari and Mercedes was unheard of a year ago. Are you enjoying seeing that evolution?
Oh, big time. It's really nice to see that team starting to recover, because one, it's just such an iconic, historic team, but two, it went through such tough times. If you think back to sort of like 2018, 2019, it was on its knees and really, really struggling. And then through essentially the COVID changes with the cost cap and then a change in ownership, it made it much more realistic that they could start to rebuild and make up for what had been a big spell of underinvestment. Sounds harsh, because it's not that someone chose not to put the money in. It's just the money wasn't there that you needed to be competitive in Formula One. And Williams, having been successful in the past, it stung a bit more, I think, not to be able to do that. But we've really seen that turn around recently under James Vowles and Dalton Capital, the owners. They've done a great job up to now. It's encouraging too, because it shows that the improvements they've made should put them in a better space for 2026, when we have new regulations and potentially a dominant Mercedes power unit, and that will put Williams in a really good spot. But I never expected them to be this competitive this year. I know that last year, and this is maybe again a bit of an admission from my end, but the team said, we've got a great car, it's just overweight. And by the middle of the season, they said, if we'd had the weight limit addressed at the start of the season, and the car was just at the limit it should have been, would have been scoring some big points. We've left a lot of opportunities out there because we had harder than most other people at the start of the season. We haven't been able to develop it so well, but we did have something that was really strong at the start of the year. Fast forward 12 months, and they've proven that out this time out. They've got a strong car starting the year. So it's been great to see. And look, Carlos Sainz, I think, was pretty miffed that the team order was ignored, but at the same time, his car was already slightly damaged, so he was always likely to slide backwards a bit. But the pace he'd shown as well, and the performance he had, quite easily we could be talking about both Williams drivers having beaten both Ferraris and Kimi Antonelli out there, and finishing 5th and 6th. Albon nearly got close to being in the fight with Max for 4th, and he said to us on TV actually after the race as well that the virtual safety car timing really helped George Russell, and without that he thinks he might even have beaten both Mercedes. So it was a really, really strong weekend for Williams.
I loved the irony of the moment when Carlos is coming up on Lewis to try and overtake the guy that took his job, while Lewis is behind Antonelli, who's the guy that he didn't take his job, when he left, but it was just like it was like the game of musical chairs, and they're all lining up behind each other. And I was just thinking, I bet Sainz he would give his right, to overtake Lewis in this race, right?
And he gave it a good go, didn't he?
He did.
Corner, basically, on the final lap. He nearly got it done. And as I say, in an alien car as well. So he was struggling with a lack of performance because of some damage to his floor. But there's a little bit of that, I think, where, there's that personal kind of, wouldn't it be lovely to prove a point? I think less towards Lewis from Carlos, but more towards Ferrari for replacing him. But at the same time, Carlos was actually the guy that I think has spoken the best about why Lewis is struggling so much and why people need to give him time and why it's so difficult for drivers after a long period of time to change teams. and he uses his own experience and says, I was at Ferrari 4 or 5 years and things became inherent and muscle memory. Lewis was at Mercedes for 12, 13 years. It's going to be even more so to a greater degree for him. So he's actually, in a weird way, been Lewis's biggest defender, which I think has been nice. But you do know that he's hopeful that there'll be more opportunities to fight with Ferrari like that. It must have been pretty sweet to at least be in that mix at the weekend. And I think actually maybe one of the reasons that Sainz would have been more annoyed come the end of the weekend that he didn't get the result because of the damage he had and the way the race panned out. But also he's thinking, does this set me up for 2026 where I might even have a better car than Ferrari has? I might be finishing regularly ahead of Ferrari. And if that's the case, he'll look like a genius in a sense because he'll have picked the right team out of a number of options that he had, even if they didn't look like such good ones because he was leaving Ferrari. So, I think his eyes now will be on to 26 and actually starting to believe rather than just hope that he'll be in a more competitive vehicle.
Well, that's a nice segue to what is happening in Lewis's head behind the wheel. His radio transmissions, why don't you have a cup of tea at the same time? I mean, it's all a bit snarky. You don't need a translator into Italian to work that one out in the pit lane, do you? What is he feeling in the car? Because he's one of those experienced drivers on the grid, 7-time world champion, etc. But his patience seems awfully slim. Is that just a reflection of his frustration with his performance and the car's performance?
I actually think, more the car's performance. When we've seen Lewis struggling himself, think back to Jeddah 2 weeks earlier, Charles Leclerc finishes third with a really strong drive. Lewis is floundering around in 7th place and struggling to get performance out of the car. Lewis is much more downbeat. He complains, but he doesn't criticize the team, not in the same way anyway, not with that sarcasm that, as you say, that we did hear from him in Miami. But then in Miami, because he was actually getting the most out of the car, he was fighting with Charles Leclerc and could have finished ahead of him, but obviously they swapped positions a few times with team orders. But because he was in that fight with him, that told him, I am at the limit of the car like Charles is. Therefore, it's not me, it's the car. Right now. I can't go further forward because you've not given me the machinery. And that allowed him to be a that bit more confident with his comments because the team also then knew, we can't blame him for the way he's driving. It's not him that needs to find more performance, it's the car. So, that's where I think their real problem was. And Lewis actually spoke very well after the race saying, look, I wasn't rude as such. I didn't swear. I wasn't effing and blinding and being really critical in that sense. I was saying, come on, get on with it, make a decision, make it quickly because we're driving a car fast here. The adrenaline's up, but we've got to get on with it, make some decisions. But then he's like, the real issue is we're a minute behind McLaren. We're fighting for 6th, 7th and 8th in this race. That's not where we should be.
That's what you guys were saying on the broadcast. Like, that's the intensity of that. And they're really trying to get the back end of the nightclub, aren't they? They're the last people on the guest list, really, the way they're performing. But all right, so Piastri wins his 4th race of the season, 3 in a row. First one since Mika Hakkinen in 1998 with McLaren to win 3 in a row. Increases his championship lead. 2 sides of the psychological coin here. Oscar and Lando. Oscar needs, you don't need him to get any more confident because I think it's very hard to knock him off. That Lando, you don't need to knock his confidence anymore. Let's quickly talk about Oscar and what you think this win even means more for him.
I think for Oscar, what it will do is show him that he's good enough to win when he's not performing at his best. I think we've seen the 2 wins that went prior to that. He'd had smooth weekends. He'd done very well. He'd either put the car on pole or he'd taken the lead straight away at the start and just driven away into the distance. That's effectively what happened in Jeddah, even though Verstappen stayed ahead and then got his penalty. So I think he was very pleased with the way he'd executed everything. He felt he didn't perform brilliantly over the weekend in Miami. And to then come away with a win as a result of that, I think says to him, hey, this is the level I'm at now, is that I need to perform at 99% all the time, and I've got a good chance of winning races, not 100% all the time. And it sounds silly, but that's a psychological difference that Lando's struggling with. Lando is looking for 100% performance all the time. He admits this. He's a perfectionist. He expects a lot out of himself. And if he falls short in any way, he's then very hard on himself. And he says he's trying to learn to accept that he's not going to be perfect ever. Really. Nobody's perfect at anything they do. And give himself a little bit more slack and say, okay, that was a good job. Yes, I can be better, but I shouldn't be so downbeat about what I've done. And I'd say this was one of Lando's weekends, actually, where he didn't do a lot wrong at the start. Not a huge amount. The way that played out, I think he was unfortunate to end up where he did. From there, he had a good recovery. The bit he needs to work on is the fight with Max and the way he goes about racing Max, because it cost him way too much time. But over the course of the weekend, I think in general, I think Lando was slightly quicker than Oscar. I think he was marginally better, might not be the right term, but just more comfortable this weekend. So if things had just played out differently, he didn't need to perform any differently. He could have won both the sprint and the Grand Prix instead of just a sprint. And a lot of people saying, he was lucky with the safety car in the sprint, but he was closing Oscar down rapidly before pit stops. So he had shown the pace at least. So I think actually both of them take something away that's the opposite of their result. Lando takes that confidence of, I was performing well, and I can't totally blame myself for not getting the result. Yes, there was an opportunity there with, if I got past Max quicker, I could have put more pressure on Oscar, but I was behind on the road through misfortune more than anything, rather than a lack of skill. Whereas for Oscar, he's thinking kind of the opposite. I performed very well at the start. I got that right, but I maybe was lacking a tiny bit of performance. I didn't have everything quite together the way I needed to win outright if it had been clean the whole way through between myself and Lando. So, yeah, strangely, they'll be tapping into the opposite rather than one walking away, Oscar the winner, great, confidence boost.
Yeah.
More, I need to keep getting better. Lando, actually, confidence boost. I'm showing that I've got the performance here, and circumstances will come to me.
Yeah, you could see it in his eyes. He was, it was that rather than his self-flagellation that he gets. So, obviously, Norris was second, Russell third, Albon, Max fourth, Albon in the Williams fifth. Okay. Amazing. Antonelli sixth. But we were finishing. I was like just, about to put the kettle on, and then you've got Sainz bumping his way around Lewis all the way on that last lap. I was thinking that could be 2 cars out, and that was fun. But it was a great weekend in every way, and certainly I think anyone that watched it knows we're setting up for this incredible rest of the year. But what about the next race coming up at Imola? Obviously, it's always an emotional weekend. We just had the anniversary of Ayrton Senna's passing. And obviously Roland Ratzenberger, we saw a lot on social media. It does put a lot of people, a lot of spotlight going into that race. But what are your predictions? And talk about the pressure on Kimi coming into a race in Italy, which is obviously going to put a lot of focus on him.
Yeah, predictions-wise, I'd still have McLaren as being the favourites, but I'm actually really keen to see what they do in terms of bringing any upgrades to the car, because they haven't for a few races now, and Imola is one that we're going to see a lot of updates, I think. It's the start of a triple header. It's the first European round, so much easier logistically to get those upgrades there, so you can do your development right up to the last minute, or your manufacturing of your new parts, and then take them out to Italy. So I think a number of teams have big upgrades. Ferrari is another one, actually. You talk about pressure and Antonelli. I don't think he's really going to be under that much. I know it sounds silly. I think he'll have a lot of attention, but I don't think there'll be expectations that he goes and performs any higher than he has been. And the way he has been performing has been very good. I'd be very impressed if he managed to stay in the top 3 in qualifying in Imola. I think that he did brilliantly in Miami, but it's so competitive up there. I don't expect him to always be a top 3 qualifier. If he did that again, that'd be incredible. But just getting through into Q3 and getting into the top 6 maybe would be a very good performance. I think what Antonelli needs is just a clean race, a clean weekend, and a maximum result. And that probably could still be 5th or 6th. Anything better than that would be very impressive. But yeah, it's Ferrari for me. I think they're going to bring a big upgrade, and they need it to work. It needs to give them much more performance, because the performance in Miami was nowhere near good enough for that team. And if anything, since the start of the year, there's been hints at good performance, and then they've normally been followed by a real dip. And that's kind of what we got in Bahrain, where there was some good race pace and Charles Leclerc was feeling more confident. And then we go to Miami and it was nowhere. And that can't be allowed to happen. And they're going to a racetrack that bears their own name. So they're going to be under a huge amount of pressure. It's the closest circuit that we race at to their Maranello base. So they've got no excuses for not getting the parts there, for starters. But they're going to have no shortage of support. And that also means no shortage of pressure, because if they are anywhere near like off the pace as they were in Miami, I mean, the Italian press will be having a field day.
Vilify them. Well, thank you very much for joining us, mate. That was really good. Really, really enjoying talking to you. And obviously, I'm sure you're going to be going to Imola, are you? You'll be there in person?
Actually, Imola, as it stands, no. Unless I get a late call up for TV. It's one of 3 that I won't travel to in person. So I'll be back on the ground for Monaco. But yeah, with 24 races, you just pick a couple just to break it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And as it stands, Imola's one of those. So sad to miss it. There's not a bad race on the calendar anymore, but Imola is such an iconic venue. It would have been great to do.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And maybe during Las Vegas, we can get you in here because obviously we share the same host with the SiriusXM. Thank you so much, Chris. We'll talk to you soon. And thank you very much to Mobil 1 for supporting the show, for the love of driving, and also obviously to the Wynn Las Vegas for letting us be here in their beautiful casino, and to SiriusXM. Well, I will see you in a couple of weeks' time right here on ESPN Extra Channel 81 or on demand on the SiriusXM app. Take care, guys. See you soon.